Up next on this episode of Echoes of Coventry.
A lot of times there's jealousy among bands, but there was camaraderie. Bands like the Brats and KISS and other bands had friends among them, you know. And seeing the other guys made the like a healthy competition. These guys are doing this, we're doing our thing. So kind of like there was a scene of love and hate both.
Sure.
But at least there's a chance they can grow and learn from it.
Welcome to 1970s New York City, where Coventry, the legendary live music venue, originally the Popcorn Pub, became a stepping stone for younger generation bands like the New York Dolls and KISS, pioneering the transition from rock and roll to glitter, punk, and beyond. I'm your host, Jef Cantor, and this is Echoes of Coventry.
New York City, call my name.
Joining us today are two enthusiasts who have been deeply embedded in the Coventry experience. First, we have Tony Mann, a native New Yorker whose journey through the music scenes of the 1970s provides an authentic backdrop to our discussion. Alongside him is Roney Lundell, a seasoned KISS aficionado from Sweden whose passion for the era and the band brings a unique international perspective to our table. Together, their narratives will help paint a broader picture of Coventry's impact both locally and globally. So thank you for joining us. I know that you have a couple of interesting stories about the Ramones and, you know, how they fit into the Coventry.
Sure. Okay. Well, one thing, Ramones are from Queens. But before the Ramones, Joey, Jeff Hyman, was in a band called Sniper. And he was the front man of that band. And he was trying to be androgynous and wear a jumpsuit. And he hung out at the club. He loved the club. He really didn't feel like he belonged ever anywhere in life except in rock and roll. He was 6'6" tall, but he was shy. So I would see Joey like hunched over and say like, hey, you know, did you ever see a giraffe bending down? That's you. Like you can't hide from who you are. And he always thought that's funny. But when he was in Sniper, he was trying to be kind of a little bit more in the glam scene, right? And the Coventry plays a big role in the success of Ramones, KISS, and other bands. And he saw all these bands play there. And it excited him and fueled his imagination and passion and desire to keep doing it. And Joey was a shy guy. Towards the end of his life, he almost had to take pills to go be in public. He was so nervous to be seen, which is a funny thing for a guy who's standing almost 7 feet tall at a mic like the Statue of Liberty in fronting the Ramones. You would never know as a guy. He was a really shy, lovely, sweet guy.
Yeah.
And so, but he felt welcome there and he loved it there. And, you know, he was actually a drummer. And when the Ramones first started, like he was a drummer. And so Tommy tried auditioning other drummers so Joey could be the front person. They couldn't find a drummer, so Tommy became the drummer. But Tommy, Dee Dee, and Joey all told me, you know, these guys went to see other bands at Coventry and it fueled their imagination and it fueled their desire. And they thought, like, these guys are here, we can do it too. You know, he wasn't like on some big ego trip. Joey Ramone's a really humble, sweet guy. I ended up making his clothes. I was his personal tailor, if you would, for like a decade, basically, you know, making everything he wore. Mm-hmm. And so he was really comfortable around me. And he wasn't around very many people.
Would you feel that there was camaraderie among the different bands or competition more?
There's always both, you know. It's like Peter Criss and Jerry Nolan. Peter Criss, drummer of KISS, and Jerry Nolan of New York Dolls, were childhood friends in Brooklyn, really tight. And, you know, kind of success divided them. You know, KISS got huge. New York Dolls really didn't. A lot of times there's jealousy among bands, but there was camaraderie. Bands like the Brats and KISS and other bands had friends among them, you know. And seeing the other guys made the competition like a healthy competition. these guys are doing this, we're doing our thing. So kind of like there was a scene of love and hate both.
Sure.
But at least there's a chance they can grow and learn from it. And places like Coventry is a place where they could get better and better and, you know, get to another level.
In the Broadway life, it's a perfect fit. Let's talk about it.
And through the miracles of modern Zoom technology, we are joined by Roney Lundell. Roney is joining us from Sweden, and he is a lifelong KISS enthusiast. He has experienced KISS live nearly 30 times across 7 countries. Roney serves as the editor-in-chief for the Swedish KISS Army fanzine, Destroyer, where he authored the most comprehensive article on the Popcorn Pub / the Coventry ever published. So I hear the words glam rock, glitter rock, shock rock, punk rock. Can you guys explain the difference?
I think glam rock and glitter rock is depending on where the bands are from. Glam rock is more the British name of the music style, and glitter rock is what the bands in New York and the press in New York called the bands that came up in the early 70s in the small clubs in New York. And shock rock is more the bands that try to shock the people, Alice Cooper, Screaming A. Hawkins, Arthur Brown, and eventually KISS. But when KISS played at the clubs, they were not shock rock. They were trying to be more bluesy almost, try to make the songs longer and improvise.
Yeah, I would say that in New York in the early 70s, there was a movement in the theater, John Vaccaro, Theater of the Ridiculousness, and they used glitter. And that brought about Iggy and the Stooges wearing glitter, and some of the groupies coming to shows for New York Dolls and things like that wearing glitter. And but I agree, usually glitter is the more extreme version of glam rock, and punk is a more raw roots, stripped back to the essence of rock, bands like the Ramones and others. Because in the 70s, some of the music got to be a bit bloated and self-indulgent, where you had people playing 30-minute solos or whatnot. And punk rock sought out to be more gutsy and roots of the primal feeling of rock and roll.
Tell us about the importance of fashion in glam and glitter rock.
Very important, image-driven. You think back to early rock and roll, Little Richard, Elvis, people like this, they wore glittery clothes, maybe even makeup a little bit, especially TV appearances. Little Richard was very flamboyant performer. So some of that transferred over into the glam rock and glitter rock and shock rock. So when you have people coming to see you and it's a show, then you play more to that audience theatrically. The image is a very important thing. Some of the bands are sold on image and don't have much substance. Bands like KISS and T-Rex had music. They wrote their songs. Other people were puppets for producers or money-making machines. Once it was formed and identified as this or that, then you can sell it and make other versions. But the originators of this stuff, they don't name it, usually. They're just doing it. It's up to the critics or someone trying to sell it, to pigeonhole it. You know, in the early days of rock radio here or radio here, you could hear Tiny Tim, Black Sabbath, Frank Sinatra, everybody all in a row. But now everything's kind of labeled and pigeonholed. So there is a marketing thing to it.
I've noticed that a lot of the bands, I don't know whether it was on purpose or not, tended towards androgyny. They had appealed to the men and the women, the fashion styles, the makeup. How did androgyny play into the scene?
It's a big point of it in marketing as well. Mark Bolan of T-Rex, very androgynous. Another person he influenced, David Bowie, very androgynous. And also there's something of sensitivity of creative people that they're open to more different looks and styles. And they're not locked into society's rules of dress or fashion. So, and then again, once it's identified, then this is a brand almost, glam or glitter or.
So when we're talking about the Coventry and the Popcorn Pub, obviously most people associate that with KISS, with them getting their big start there. And Roney, even though you became a KISS fan after this, you kind of went back and delved into what those early days was like. What you get out of your research into the early days of Coventry?
I think it's because the later KISS years are very well documented, but the early years are not. And there is a Gene and Paul version that is being pumped out since 30, 40 years back, where Ace and Peter was marginalized, and the same with other very important people in their crew, like Sean Delaney, Bill O'Coin. And also I wanted to know how it all started, how the four who became one, what is the truth behind it? And I wanted to dig deeper into that. And it all started at the Coventry. That's where they started to play live. But at the same time, they played like 7 gigs at Coventry, maybe 8, but 7 that's documented, and we know that it did. Then maybe 1 festival. I want to know everything about that year, because they were forming. They were totally lost in the beginning. If you see the photos from the first gigs, they look like anybody who walked in from the street and put on some makeup on their face. There's no stage show, nothing. It's just barely holding together speakers, and they were really amateurish in the beginning. And that's what I like. How did they, in less than a year, become such a juggernaut? That's impressive.
Roney, just real quick, one of the things I loved about your article was it made me feel like I walked in. You described what it was like when you came in the front door. I think you said there was a long bar. Then you went into another room. There were multiple stages. I think you even talked about the fact that the bands kind of fought over what the order was going to be. Like Paul just kind of said, yeah, you can play, and figure it out, and then walked off.
Yeah, I think he was kind of afraid of confrontation, Paul. I think he didn't want to, mess with the bands. He let them decide themselves. And I think that was a story that I was told by Danny, who played in a band called Age, and they were playing together with Brats one time. And they were setting up before Brats arrived, and when Brats arrived, it was like, no, we're going to have that stage. And that was the smallest stage, the one to the right when you get into the inner room, the big, large inner room. And the date that was a little bit bigger was to the left. There was a dressing room downstairs. Yeah.
Setsu Coleman told me from Magic Tramps, they were getting made up in the basement downstairs, and Magic Tramps wore whiteface makeup. This is before KISS. And he said that when Gene and Paul were in Wicked Lester, he caught them playing with his whiteface makeup in the basement, and before they even had KISS. And they also had a fire-breathing guy, Satan. So KISS took every good idea from every band, and the Magic Tramps was one of them. And they were in the basement playing with Magic Tramp makeup.
online there's some video of one of the shows at the Coventry, which was really interesting to see.
Ladies and gentlemen, put your two lips together, because they're going to blow them away. Kiss! Kiss!
That's when they were already, they've been like a few months with Bill O'Coin, Sean Delaney to really sharpen their act to become a professional band, because they had some more shows actually booked at Coventry in the fall of '73 that they cancelled because they didn't want to be the bar band anymore. They wanted to be something bigger.
Yeah, and they really honed their act, and they chose wisely, and they had a great support system. That's a lot of the bands didn't have in New York that didn't make it. Magic Tramps, the Brats, whoever. With Bill O'Coin and Sean Delaney and Carol Ross and the whole team they built up, KISS really had a support system. They had a management, quickly a record label, press, a lot going for them and behind them. And Bill O'Coin had a TV background. He was from Massachusetts, but he had a show here called Flipside, and the guys watched that show, and they invited him to one of their shows in Times Square. And Sean and Bill, they signed KISS to a management deal. They said, if we can't get you a record deal, then it'll be off. And they did. My friend Zeka Esquivel, who was in Cherry Vanilla, Get Wet, a lot of rock bands as a keyboard player, had a rehearsal space, and KISS would rehearse there on camera. And they would watch that and study it like a football team would study what they're doing right and wrong. So after some time, they had the 23rd Street loft that we visited where they would rehearse. They got Ace to join there. And then they would go downtown to Zeka's loft, rehearse their moves and their show, the fire breathing and everything, and watch it. So if you watch KISS, they're not drinking or doing something. They're never doing anything boring on stage. In fact, when Paul's hair itched from being dyed, he was scratching it, and Sean said, make a big deal out of that and make it part of the show. So they're very visual oriented and worked on their show. And by the last Coventry show, they were closer to what they became. And they rehearsed the show, and they did it because they had to rehearse it. There was fire and bombs going off, and they could get hurt. So you had to know the songs without even thinking about it, perform, be entertaining, don't get burned, whatever. But at Coventry, they started with crude makeup, crude costume, and they worked on it, and nobody was there to see them the first shows, hardly anyone, handful of people. By the time they stopped playing there, it was packed. And then they had the album on the way. So he makes a good point in what they developed, and they worked at it. So that's all part of it too, in being a professional entertainer, building a worldwide show. They weren't thinking of themselves as a New York band. They weren't competing with the locals. They were thinking, we're going to take this everywhere from the get-go. So they contacted Bill. Bill's show Flipside had John Lennon making an album with Yoko Ono, Stevie Wonder, the Raspberries, all people they looked up to. And they said, if we can get this guy behind us, he can help shape us. And he did. Early on, KISS wanted to be like the New York Dolls everybody in New York wanted to be like the New York Dolls. And it didn't work for them. But they went to see Alice Cooper at Madison Square Garden, $1 Billion Baby Show. And they said, what if we're 4 Alice Coopers? And there's other influences. But that was a major thing to make them a little more macho than some of these type of bands. Bowie, they have great songs. They sold it with a stage show as well. And instead of saying David was bisexual, they said he was from Mars, or whatever. They said he's a spaceman. So the Spiders from Mars. But KISS, as they went on, got a little more macho, but still retained some of the glam, glitter aesthetic from the heyday of that.
Do you think that the New York Dolls were kind of like the band everyone looked up to at the time?
Absolutely. The New York Dolls opened for the Faces at Wembley with Rod Stewart. They didn't have a record deal. Everybody was coming to check them out. Mick Jagger, Bowie, everybody. And they were a band in New York with a lot of girls, pretty girls around them. Most rock and roll shows then were pretty tough. Bikers, wasn't friendly towards women, aside from obviously Elvis and bands before. But in this era of rock, hard rock, it was more like just rough. And New York Dolls always had a lot of beautiful girls there, and they didn't feel threatened by being there. And it was just a phenomenon to itself. So there was New York Dolls and Aerosmith early on kind of competing at the same time. Same management, right? And Lieber Krebs basically decided to push Aerosmith. They were able to form them into a more commercial package, but they took the fashion of New York Dolls, the sound men, the girlfriends, everything, and they just went with it. They went somewhere else eventually. But at that time, that's what was happening, and they were very influential. They should be in Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but anyone around in New York at that time, they were part of the rock scene, part of the art scene, the Warhol scene, the culture. Because a lot of rock from that time stems out of art and Andy Warhol. He promoted Velvet Underground and Lou Reed. And there wasn't a lot of rock clubs here. People were playing in abandoned hotels, Mercer Arts Center, Diplomat, and then out to Queens, Coventry.
I often read that New York Dolls was like a house band at Coventry. They were not. They played like 12 times. It was bands like the Brats and Harlots of the 42nd Street. They played there almost 50 times each. They were the house bands, if anyone was a house band. And both of those bands are, not common knowledge like New York Dolls, but they both deserve to be. And there are some music out there from both of those bands. And if you haven't heard them, try to find them, because Harlots of the 42nd Street is an album out. It's fantastic. The Brats, it's more a few songs that's on some compilations. But both of them are worth checking out.
Well, I see that you brought some books here.
I've worked for years with an author, Stephen Blush. He wrote American Hardcore, that was made into a movie bought by Sony Picture Classics, but then started kind of as a fact checker on this book, New York Rock, which mentions the Coventry and has a whole chapter on glitter rock and how KISS and other bands got started in Manhattan and why some succeeded and some fell by the wayside. And Lost Rockers is a book I helped write with Stephen Blush and Paul Rockman, and that documents people's careers, maybe some people that the limelight didn't shine on enough. One of the bands in there is the Brats. They're a band that played at Coventry, and So New York has a rich rock and roll history, a rich history about everything. And then you get people like Paul Sub coming to New York and really starting something, giving people a place to play, to have a place to improve your act and hone your craft. Now a lot of the clubs are being gobbled up by corporates and famous people fighting to get in there. Never mind if you're a kid in high school trying to learn how to play for the first time. So places like Popcorn, Coventry, Mercer Arts Center, CBGB's, and all these were incredibly important to the scene. They were the scene. But yeah, I'm proud to have worked on these books and working on other books currently. And quite a few of them touch on New York rock history, Coventry. So if you can check out New York Rock, it's on St. Martin's Press. I was a contributing author to that. It's by Stephen Blush. And Lost Rockers came out through Random House, Powerhouse, and that's got a lot of people's stories in there too.
Well, music always brings people together, and it's, more understandable that you would end up crossing paths with Charlie and Paul because you're here. But Roney, you're in Sweden.
Right.
And how did this happen that you kind of came into Charlie and Paul and the Coventry's life?
The reason is this magazine that I'm a chief editor of. It's the Swedish KISS fan club fanzine called Destroyer. When it was getting close to the 50 years anniversary of the first KISS show, as I had a few days, and I think it was in the summer the year before, I thought about why is there no info about this place? There's only like a few paragraphs here and there. There's no deep knowledge about it. The thing is that the name Paul Sub was almost unknown in KISS circles among KISS fans until a book came out in the early 2000 called KISS Alive Forever. It was a book by Jeff Sue and Kurt Gooch that chronicles every KISS show ever up until that year. I think it was 2001. And in that one, they interviewed Paul Sub back then. And when the anniversary was getting close, I thought about, I need to find some people who went to the club and interview them about the place. And I started to look at the internet, and I found the Charlie Sub and the Sound Dogs homepage. And I emailed them, and Rich Brotman, he contacted me and said, I'm the curator of for the Sub family, and I can answer your questions. Eventually, I got to talk to Charlie on the phone, and I interviewed him for an hour or so, and then I got to talk to Paul Sub also for a long time, and I also talked to about, I think, 25 people, musicians, a barman who worked there, also some fans who went there. There's a woman who took like thousands of photos in the 70s of rock bands, who was virtually unknown. But one thing I want to say about Coventry and Paul Sub is like, he never figured out what he was going to do with the place. He was like throwing things at the wall, what sticks? Oh, not that, okay, let's try this one. Oh, it didn't stick, so we try something else. He was inventing things to get people to come. Like every week it was a new theme or a new idea he had. He was inventing, he was really an entrepreneur, Paul Sub.
Paul made a community where people felt like they could do their thing.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Echoes of Coventry. Don't forget to follow us on social media at Bliss Street NYC on Facebook and Instagram, and at The Sound Dogs on Facebook and Instagram to keep up with the latest episodes and behind-the-scenes content. Stay tuned for more tales from New York's homegrown rock and roll scene, and I'll catch you around the neighborhood.